Welcome to 6 Degrees of Connection, the podcast where we explore our connections and their stories. Please welcome your host, Andy.
The prospect of a barren desert like Earth is unthinkable, but we are fast approaching a situation where today's science fiction will be tomorrow's reality. And the biggest challenge in the days to come is to provide safe drinking water to the people. The state's failure is covered up by private enterprise, but at the cost of natural resources. At the end of the day, the question still remains: is the water from my tap safe to drink? Our guest for today is someone who aims to tackle this issue head-on with a little help from technology, and especially in a country like India, where safe and hygienic water is directly proportional to your income level. He couldn't have entered the scene at an apt moment, but in a way, with water, I guess there never is an apt moment, for it is at the heart of life itself. He is the co-founder of the subscription-based water purifier company DrinkPrime, an IoT-enabled water ATM, so to speak, which dispenses water for as little as rupees 1 per litre or 0.01 cents per litre in dollars. Started in the metro of Bangalore, DrinkPrime has over 25,000 users in residential homes utilizing its system for domestic uses, and has started operations in Hyderabad, another megacity. DrinkPrime has also been in the news recently with a 21.56 crore angel investment, or approximately 2.5 million USD, valuing the company at approximately 85 crore, which is about 12 million USD. And this is just the beginning for a startup whose core mission is to provide safe drinking water to the population. Today, we discuss on the situation of water in India, where and how we get it, responsibilities of the state, water purifiers, the present and the future of water consumption in India, and how he, DrinkPrime, plans to tackle the growing inequality in the provision of safe drinking water in the cities of India and beyond, using a new age idea and good old tech. Welcome, Manas, to the show.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I know we've been connections for close to 7+ years while we were both working at this tech company in Bangalore. And of course, Manas has gone on to bigger and better things.
So yeah, you've been far too kind. I mean, we are all doing our bit to change things around us. Like you rightly mentioned, we have been friends from the last 7 odd years, and right from the time that we were both working in Sonata Software, and even before that, both you as well as me, we have always been curious about the things around us, and have always been curious about the problems that people like us were facing, and if we can do our bit to help the society at large, and if not the society at large, at least people like us, if we can do anything to make our lives better. Extremely grateful for the opportunity that I'm getting, that I'm living each day to do my bit for making people's lives better.
To set the outline for this episode, I would like to start giving our listeners a picture of India as a whole as well, in the context of water we drink. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is the longest major poem by the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and has these lines which we've all heard before: water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. Though in this poem it refers to the sea, these lines I felt were particularly poignant when it comes to drinking water in India. To many of our listeners, especially non-Indian listeners, India as a whole, as a concept, might be very hard to grasp when we look at the life in the city, the life in the villages, towns, which is also very different. And this difference is visible in the way we consume our water as well. Can you outline how and the why of water consumption, specifically water in India?
So allow me to paint this picture. I mean, you've done a very good job in setting the context right, especially with the couple of lines that you mentioned, right? Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. That sort of sums up our situation pretty well. But if I have to paint a picture a little more vividly for our readers, right? The first thing that you would like to, if you're looking at it from a lens of someone staying in the West, first thing you would like to be cognizant of the fact is that India is not a country where you can trust your tap water. which means that tap water in India, unlike many developed or developing nations also, is not safe for consumption. A few reasons behind it. So, first of all, the tap water that we receive in India, more than 50% of it is actually not, the government is unable to ramp up with the infrastructure requirements of our cities, and hence more than 50% of the water that residents consume up cities like Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, and so on and so forth, typically are not provided by the government. Now, if they're not provided by the government, what other sources of just raw water which is coming to our tap, do residents have? Number one, many of them are reliant on bowels, which means it's a very common practice in India. I would say a vast majority of homes in our urban pockets, especially in the suburbs of our larger cities, have their own bowel connection, wherein they dig a hole into the ground and basically through the help of a submersible pump the water to an overhead tank, and from that overhead tank they get the water to their respective taps. This concept may seem a little bit primitive when it comes to the state of the infrastructure in West, but it's a reality in our country. So 50% of them are supplied by the government. About a vast majority use bowel, and the vast majority use water tankers. Now, water tanker is an interesting thing, wherein if there is no other source of water, and if during the dry seasons the bore has dried up, you simply call up mostly private enterprises who run those large 30 feet trucks which carry up to 6,000 to 10,000 liters of water in one go. You give them a call, they possibly come to your home and give you the water, and the water straightway goes and sits in your swamp, and then from there it's pumped to your overhead tank, and from the overhead tank to your homes. This is typically the case where most of India's larger gated communities where more than 100 families live, typically access their drinking water. Very few, a small fraction of communities, the larger communities, affluent middle class and upper middle class Indians live, have access to government provided safe water. So this is the state of just the water condition in India. Now, the second piece of it is this water safe to drink? Is this water potable, or is this? So there, because of the fact that the sources of our input water vary so much, and because the fact that even the water that is supplied by the government, the infrastructure is still lagging decades behind. The infrastructure, I mean, in many cities is actually decades behind. The pipes are of lead, and it's very frequent to see lead getting impregnated into the input water. And also the supply of the water itself is erratic. In some cases, people get water maybe a couple of times a week. Sometimes they get once a week. At max, they get a few hours a day. So that's the spectrum in which people normally get the water that is supplied by the government, which itself is of questionable quality. Groundwater, because of the rapid industrialization in India, various factories sort of remain unchecked in the neighborhoods which are nearer to the places where the bores are dug up. So, in groundwater, in many cases in India, is actually laced with lead, arsenic, or many other heavy metals which can potentially be dangerous to our health. Now, with respect to water tankers, that's the most unregulated bit, wherein since it's run by private enterprise, you call up and you get water tanker. The water tanker person brings in a tanker full of water from one source today, another source tomorrow, day after another source. So overall, the quality of input water is bad. It is also not only is it bad, but it is also changing on a regular basis.
I was in Chennai. Chennai is very hot, as you know. And we in Chennai as well, there is this big problem of water. And I remember always the streets used to be lined with ladies with these big pots waiting for the water tanker to come in so they can get their share. These pots filled up using this water tanker is what sustains that family living in these very close apartments. But this is for cities. Now, Chennai, like Hyderabad, like Delhi, you can call it a mega city, right? Which has been cities from time immemorial because of the proximity to the sea, because of the proximity to other factors as well. Now, what about the villages? The consumption in villages has been through natural ways, isn't it? There was really no concept of piped drinking water being given to every house.
One, we discussed about the megacities. Now, if we have to look at the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, wherein the government is finding it little difficult to cope up with the infrastructure requirements, and water and overall infrastructure quality is what it is. Now, if you look at the cities from 10 to 50 or 10 to 100, which is the top next 90 cities, which is what we call as the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, right? The situation surprisingly is slightly better because those cities have not expanded quite as much as the tier 1 cities have in the last decade or so. They have not seen that much scale of urbanization. So whatever basic infrastructure was put in by the government in many of those cities, that infrastructure holds good. Having said that, the scope of variation in these tier 2 cities is vastly different, which typically means that in many cities the water you would get pretty decent water which is highly regulated by the local municipality, versus in many cities it's highly unregulated. So the spectrum of difference is there, and since they are ruled by the respective states, respective laws, respective governments, huge I mean, it's very difficult to generalize what is the quality of water in any particular pocket in India. Now if you look at the villages in India, typically today and nowadays it's improving quite a lot, but still many villages are without the basic necessities like running water. When I say running water for the entire village, and also basic electricity. So in absence to this, many Indians actually have to travel with pots on their heads for kilometers at stretch to get water from the nearest place where they could find, and then travel back. Yeah, in especially in little bit of in rural areas of India, it is actually a reality that people have a full-time job, or even at least spend a considerable amount of their time and resources each day just to get the basic necessity, which is water.
Water is a state subject. You brought up the point that the water infrastructure is actually developed by the state. Now, in this case, is it the state's responsibility to actually ensure that we get the safe chlorinated drinking water?
In India, the water that is supplied through our taps, the state does not claim it is good for drinking. But even then, also, even if it is not good for drinking in the way that it is,
Yeah.
there still is minimum requirement that the state should supply the water in a minimum format that it can be purified. So if the water quality actually deteriorates beyond a certain level, normal standard methods of purification may not be sufficient to even purify the water. But yeah, to answer your point, it is a state subject.
Sources of water, where does it come from for the state to provide it?
So we are a primarily monsoon dependent country. Monsoons feed our rivers, and then there's a whole infrastructure which is of reservoirs and dams which take advantage of storing the water, and which is then pumped to our respective cities and villages, both for irrigation and agricultural use, as well as for our domestic and industrial use.
Growing up in small town Kerala, you can actually smell the chlorine in the water. And that's when you know that the water is actually safe to an extent. If you don't smell chlorine in the water, you understand that it's just fit for watering the plants. That kind of is ingrained in our heads, and hence graduating into jerry cans and plastic bottles and all, which we'll come to at a later point in time. But can you explain the process of purification of the raw water from the rivers that happens at these plants, managed, I assume, by the state?
No, as of now, this infrastructure is entirely managed by the government, and it's a state subject. Since we are talking about so many different municipalities, so many different states, so many different cities, the actual purification method actually differs quite a bit, and it, like the way it should actually be dependent on what is the quality of the input water that is getting pumped in. However, if I have to generalize it to a certain extent, what it primarily goes through two major stages. First one is the basics of purification, which means removal of sand, dust, mud, and other visible impurities from water. The second one is chlorination. So just by doing these two steps, the water would be, what I would say, safe for domestic consumption. I'm still not saying safe for drinking, but safe for domestic consumption, which means it is good enough. It will not cause you rashes. You can take a bath in it. You can use it for other washing your clothes, washing your utensils, and possibly to feed into a water purifier, which will then give you potable water.
Across India right now, like in many of the other countries around the world, we are facing water shortages as well. You would be surprised to look at India from above, a green patch of land with a network of water, rivers, lakes, and big coastline as well, with seas feeding into it. But then water shortage is actually a major issue within India and within all the major big cities as well, and spreading into the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities as well. Groundwater depletion, less rainfall, no monsoon. All these environmental conditions are probably man-made to an extent. But the main crux of the matter is water shortage. We had cases in the past where we actually, the people, the society at large, have a tendency to blame multinational corporations for the problems with water shortages. There was this incident of Coca-Cola or Pepsi settling up a bottling plant in this village, and within a couple of years all the wells started drying up. Obviously people were up in arms against it. The question for me is primarily man-made, isn't it? And digging of wells, bore wells, tube wells is actually increasing the problem.
Yes, Andy. So, like you rightly mentioned very nicely or summarized very nicely the problem. But you would be surprised to know that the solution is actually pretty much man made and pretty much within our reach. Even though we are still very far from actually having a lot of this implemented. But the best solution to our water crisis is absolutely the fact that in India, we are one of the places in the world where the least amount of water is actually getting consumed. I mean, if you look at the percentage in terms of the percentage of rainfall received versus the water that is getting used by any human activity, be it irrigation, be it domestic or industrial use, possibly which is between 1 and 2%, if I remember the statistics correctly. While in other developed countries, because of rainwater harvesting, because of better dams, because of better other facilities, it goes up to 4 or 5%. So if we are just able to solve that bit, if we are able to inculcate better rainwater harvesting and better facilities, the amount of rainfall that we receive, the amount of monsoon that we receive, few benefits would happen. Number one, we would have actually much less flash floods, which is actually a big cause of concern for many of our states in India. Number two is the water shortage would go away.
Oh, that's a surprising figure. Is it just down to the fact that we don't have rainwater harvesting facilities or any of those water storage facilities?
Yes, so rainwater harvesting is primarily a urban phenomenon, but even if you consider the rural phenomenon or pan countrywide phenomenon, we are lacking quite considerably when it comes to water storage, water reservoirs, water harvesting as such, right? Unlike other countries which are not dependent on monsoons, our water supply typically lasts those 3 to 4 months of from a 12-month cycle. Puts a lot more strain on our water conservation efforts versus it would have otherwise in certain other parts of the world.
Waterborne diseases. Now, this is a problem particularly rife in India. Also, one of the reasons we don't drink tap water, diseases like cholera, diarrhea, malaria have been spreading through improper management of water resources. Now, while researching for this show, and I had this statistic, Ganges, the river, provides water to 500 million people in India. And we all know stories about the pollution and yearly proclamations from the government there that they would actually clean up the Ganges river water. Now, Ganges as a river is also one example of the way we don't utilize or manage the available water resources. And I have another theory about class and other divisions in society which enables provision of water to the most affluent, especially in these big cities.
So, Andy, first of all, I mean, it's a little bit of an understatement to say that people in India do not rely on tap water for drinking. While it is true the fact that the tap water in India may not be fit for consumption in its current form, but a good percentage, right? I mean, it is also has got to do with the income inequality, and because of the fact that we are a developing country, more than 20% people actually do rely on the same tap water. And that's the segment of the population that's actually the most vulnerable for diseases like cholera, diarrhea, and even more serious waterborne diseases. That's where we are. On certain extent, we are failing our most vulnerable sections of the society, and efforts are being made. Considerable efforts are being made in that case, but a lot is left yet to be desired. Now, if you look at what are people using or how are people managing their drinking water, again, it is a function of the class and the income levels, right? Let's segment our society in terms of income level wise. So if you look at the top 5% of urban Indians who are little affluent, who earn over a certain threshold, they primarily have an electronic water purifier in their homes, which is a RO or a UV or likewise. Between 5 to 35%, which is the top 40, which is what we call as the middle class, they rely primarily on three methods. One is some of them do have a water purification device, which is a water purifier in the home. A majority of them actually are reliant on bottled water. Now, why are so many people reliant on bottled water? A few reasons. Number one, water purifiers in India are expensive. They're expensive to install because because of the fact that the water purification process itself is little complex. Unlike the West, where a simple pitcher is sufficient to purify water, to remove bad smell from water, and the tap water is actually good enough to be consumed in the shape that it is in. In India, the water has to go through multiple stages of purification. In many cases, up to 7 stages of purification, which includes complex mechanisms such as reverse osmosis, ultraviolet disinfection, and as well as adding various minerals, minerals into back into the water. So that's the segment which typically relies on bottled water primarily. Now, if you look at the remaining 60%, right, we have covered about 40%. The government is actually doing a pretty good job. I would not say government is not doing anything, which is in cities such as Bangalore, in cities such as Chennai, Mumbai, and likewise, right? Government, through the help of public-private partnerships, have actually installed more than 1,000 odd water ATMs in each cities. Now, this is a temporary fix to a major problem, because what they're doing is they're also doing the same thing, which is through the help of a borewell, they are they are drawing deep holes into the ground, and they're depleting the natural water, the groundwater, in the long run. But at least in the short term, they are able to provide the vulnerable sections of the society water, which otherwise would have costed them maybe 2 rupees a liter. They are able to provide them at 50 paisa a liter or 30 paisa a liter. So that's at least 1/5 or 1/6 of what they would have to pay for drinking water otherwise. While it is very easy to do infrastructural change, it is very difficult to maintain them. So while government has actually put in the effort, given the land at a free of cost, and put in the capital requirement to install thousands of water ATMs, in majority of the cases, a good percentage, I would not say what percentage, but at least as a common man who observes these things, a good percentage of them are actually non-functional, primarily because of the negligence of the authorities. So while on one hand we are doing some good work, on a lot is left to be desired.
And again, this is primarily for Tier 1, Tier 2 probably cities, isn't it? I think the concentration of the government is primarily to these cities because it is assumed that Tier 3 and villages and small towns have other natural sources of water which can sustain the population.
One is that. Second is government itself can only do so much. That's where various public-private partnerships are opening up, wherein there are a number of NGOs. There are various CSR activities which are happening, which are actually opening these water ATMs or trying to replicate what government is doing in Tier 1 cities across our villages. But the scale of the problem is huge, that even with all the best of the efforts, I am sure we are just scratching the surface. And even this also, I would say, I mean, in our urban cities, not more than 10 to 15% of our population has access to these kind of water ATMs. So what happens to the remaining population? The remaining population typically relies on the old methods of consuming water, which is simply by boiling water, or are reliant on just consuming tap water. Now, this segment of the population, which is about 15-20% of population who consume tap water, and the strange part is even they don't stay in good enough housing that they have a direct tap water connection. They, in many cases, have to travel up to a kilometer, maybe even more. I'm talking about big cities, up to a kilometer, just to gather water from a public water fountain of sorts, and bring it to their home and consume it. Yeah, this is the population which is the most vulnerable and which is also having to suffer the most because of waterborne disease.
So another statistic for you, it is reported that groundwater in 1/3 of India's 600 districts is not fit for drinking, as the concentration of fluoride, iron, salinity and arsenic exceeds the tolerance levels. About 65 million people have been suffering from fluorosis, a crippling disease due to a high amount of fluoride, and 5 million are suffering from arsenicosis. A World Resources report says that about 70% of India's water supply is seriously polluted with sewage effluents. The UN itself reported that India's water quality is poor, and it ranks about 1/20th of 122 nations in terms of quality of water available to its citizens. But without getting too technical, how exactly does water purifiers work?
So let me try to cover this in brief. This is actually a pretty subjective question, because different kinds of purification methods are actually suitable for different kinds of water. Now, let's talk about water which has got high amounts of lead, arsenic, and likewise inside them. So they typically are what we call as this class of impurities is what we call as heavy metals. So there is only one method, affordable method at least, which is known to mankind, in which can remove dissolved heavy metals from water. The method is called reverse osmosis. So typically a reverse osmosis purification process, what it does is it takes input water, passes it through a pump so that a strong pressure is maintained. Then it pushes the water through a semi-permeable membrane. So think of it like water that is passing through a sieve which has got very small holes. What would happen if you do that? All the impurities would get thrown out. Even some amount of good water would get thrown out, and what gets passed out of it remains absolutely pure water, devoid of any kind of contamination whatsoever. So this, in a nutshell, is how reverse osmosis works. Now, ultraviolet disinfection, it's fairly simple. Ultraviolet disinfection typically is where we pass the water through a UV tube. It does the same effect as chlorination, which is it makes all the bacteria and viruses present inside the water, it immobilizes them and basically renders them harmless. So these are the two major water purification methods that we employ. In majority of the cases, a combination of both reverse osmosis and ultraviolet filtration may be required, because of the fact that even pure water that gets passed out of the reverse osmosis purifier, because the fact that it is stored in tanks for days together, there's a chance that it gets contaminated by bacteria and viruses, and ultraviolet purification may be required for it to be able to consumed for drinking.
And now moving on to DrinkPrime, the product and the company. What's the genesis story behind it? How did you decide to focus your startup idea into water?
Let me tell you a little bit about the background, right? I mean, for the benefit of the viewers. So it was around 2014, 2015 when we were working happily in Sonata, having a normal job and going about our day-to-day things, right? And that is the time where I and my roommate, who is also my co-founder in this venture, Vijender Reddy, we were both staying in homes, and we were a little frustrated about one small thing in our life, which is both of us were not from Bangalore. We had come to Bangalore for our careers. So we were not from Bangalore, came to Bangalore, and I mean everything was okay, but somehow we felt that drinking water is becoming a problem day by day. What were we using? We were using those large canisters like that middle class population of India, those large canisters which supply water anywhere between 2 to 4 rupees per liter, kind of a thing. So we were both using bottled water, and we have been using it from the longest amount of time, years together, right? Since the time we were in Bangalore. But somehow we were not very happy with this, and we wanted to sort of understand how many more people were unhappy with this. So we went and asked around, are you also unhappy with your bottled water situation, with to people like you who were our colleagues at that point in time, similar age group, similar income profile, and also from outside Bangalore and inside in Bangalore for their careers, right? So what we observed is a few things which came out drastically. Problems with bottled water, just by speaking with people. Number one, sometimes the water inside canister seemed dirty. It had floating impurities in it. Sometimes the canister itself was so dirty that it was very difficult to assume that this water inside this is safe. Number three is the actual delivery of the thing itself, wherein it was primarily supplied by unorganized players who were near our home, what we call as kirana shops or local shops. So what happens when we reach home late from office and the kirana shop nearby your home is closed? You would have to pass the entire night without the basic safe drinking water. What happens in the middle of a Friday night? You have a couple of friends coming over, you're enjoying a few drinks, and your water can finishes because of overconsumption. The kirana shop would have been long gone by then, and all the other shops who were selling water would have been gone. What do you do about drinking water in the middle of a night? So this was typically some of the problems that people like us, and especially with women, we faced. We also saw this, that the person coming in to deliver this water canisters has to walk into their homes, that to 2-3 times a week. So sometimes some women found it a little unsafe in many cases. So these were some of the problems that we saw with the setup that was there. And we wanted to do a step little bit deep dive into it, and then we sort of picked up randomly 30 to 40 samples of this bottled water and tried to understand what is the quality behind it. What we observed then was pretty shocking. Which is that fact that about 70%, more than 70% of this bottled water in circulation do not meet the basic government of India approved ISI and BIS safety norms.
Even though they have got ISI plastered all over them, isn't it?
So yeah, I mean that's more like the industry is a little bit unregulated. So now that we found out so much, we figured out that hey, let's go ahead and try to solve this problem in whatever sense we can. The idea was never to start a company. The idea always been to solve a problem. What we did, very simple. We never thought of water purifiers itself. We opened up. I mean, all of us were consumers of bottled water, so we opened up a simple app developers or software people. So we figured out that let's solve it with technology.
Yeah, I don't blame you. As probably the first immersive tech generation, I guess everything can be solved with a mobile app.
So we made a simple app, and it connected verified suppliers of bottled water along with consumers of bottled water. A simple process, and every water can, jerry can that was sort of delivered through our platform, we sort of put in a label on that, which is delivered by Waterwala or verified by Waterwala. That simple label that we put on the water cans, people started trusting it a lot, and just by that label and a few flyers distribution, we got to about 5,000 odd households in a span which was around 6-7 months. This is also the time when Vijender had left his job and got into this full time, and I was also serving my notice period in Sonata. So it was round about that time then that we saw this problem is deep enough, and let's try to do something about it. Trying to scale this venture up, what happened was, I mean, the demand was pretty much there. Even without us telling people, informing people, people were just coming in. That gave us the conviction that we were on to something big. But at the same point in time, the solution, which was supplying bottled water to people through an app, did not look like a scalable solution because of a few reasons. Even with after our best efforts, we could only guarantee quality to a certain extent. That too, even if the source is pure, in many cases the shopkeepers stored the water cans and supplied the water cans in places which were exposed to heat, dust, and sunlight, thereby still leaving a chance for contamination. The problems around the supply, are they supplying water to the consumers on time? That pretty much remained, and we could not do anything about it. Also, because of the commission structure, because of the fact that water is such a basic necessity and it is expensive to transport from point A to point B, and especially to deliver to Indian homes where this whole jerry can weighs about 22 kilos and a person can only deliver X number of jerry cans, possibly 20 to 25 jerry cans a day. It had a physical limit to it. We could not really scale up our delivery workforce. All of these and multiple other things led us to think there has to be a better way to solve this problem. And just by throwing more force or banging your head into the wall may not be the best possible way to solve this problem. That's when we sort of went and asked ourselves the fundamental question. Water purifiers has been in existence from the last 20 odd years. All of us have grown up in India, I mean, in Indian context, I mean, have grown up seeing those aquaguard people walking into our homes with their polished shoes and polished tires. At that point in time, tire was a novelty. All of us had seen those actresses endorsing brand name water purifiers on national television in the middle of our cricket matches and stuff. Still, why were people like us not using water purifiers? When we went ahead and asked that question, we found a few simple answers. What did we find? Number one, water purifier is actually expensive. The equipment itself is not expensive, but the way it is sort of flows to the end consumer, wherein it flows through a dealer, a distributor, and the sales point is actually a demo. And companies use these water purification technologies. In certain cases, it is actually needed, but in certain cases, they also use these gimmicks in many cases just so that they can extract more money out of the water purifier and possibly position it in the same vein as you would position any other consumer durable, like a TV or a fridge. But in reality, the water purifier is a slightly different equipment wherein a consumer like you and me are more bothered about the output, which is safe drinking water, and not necessarily the fact that it has got 5 or 7 or 12 stages of purification.
Right.
And also, of course, not to forget the cost that unlike a TV or a fridge, water purifier had a total cost of ownership attached to it. TCO, as we would like to call it in software terms, which goes beyond just the initial investment that you would have to make. You would have to spend anywhere between 25 to 35% of the product cost each year just on service and maintenance, which itself seemed like a very big cost to our users. And we figured out, hey, why can't we marry the best of both the models, which is bottled water on one hand and water purifiers on the other hand? What did we like about bottled water? Number one, there is very less switching cost attached to it. There is less inertia attached to it, which means today, if I like it, I take bottled water. Tomorrow, if I don't like it, I do not take bottled water. Then there is no one that I have to be answerable to. There is no capital investment. And I get to pay for how much ever water I consume. So I sort of control my own destiny in a way. These are the things that I liked about bottled water. What did I like about water purifiers? Primarily that it's a superior purification technology. It is always available wherever I mean, at my point of view is 24/7. I will never run out of water. So these are the two good things about both of these models. And then on top of it, we decided to combine both of this and come up with a hybrid model, which we call as DrinkPrime, and add a technology layer on top of it. Now, what does the technology do? As we are
Yeah.
evolving, the technology is doing a lot of things, which is understand what is the area's atmospheric conditions, which means what is the temperature, what is the humidity level. It also understands what is the macro and micro quality of water in your area. When I say micro, what is the TDS of the water that is coming out of your for people who don't understand this? TDS is a very broad measure of the dissolved impurities in water. We call it as total dissolved solids, and the measure of it is ppm. ppm translates to parts per million, and WHO says any water which is below, if I'm not wrong, 200 ppm is safe for drinking. But in reality, most of us consume water which is between 30 to 100 ppm.
If we have doubts about our drinking water, we would have to send it to private test labs to get results as well,
Yes.
isn't it? There is actually no way of identifying what's the required ppm, which is hygienic enough from government sources, because I don't think even they have any control over how much safety is there in
Yes,
the
so the
water they give
ppm
us.
keeps on fluctuating. That's number one. But even the general public can actually buy a small piece of equipment, and actually, it's a small handheld device which they can use to measure it. So it's not that difficult to measure it. But ppm is only the surface or the tip of the iceberg. What consists of the ppm, or the parts per million, or what are the constituents of the dissolved solids, is what is more important than the numeric value of the ppm itself. So that's what we call as the macro analysis, right? We collect area level data, and we do lab tests, we do detailed tests to understand what is the sodium, chlorine, fluorine, arsenic, and
Yeah.
what are the constituents, and what kind of purification methods would be suitable for this area on a macro level. Depending on these parameters, we actually customize the water purifier that goes into our customers' homes. In many cases, they are RO. In many cases, they are RO plus UV. In many cases, where the ppm is actually pretty good, and where the government is actually doing a pretty good job in terms of supplying good fresh water to people's homes. Many cases, RO is not required, and we do not suggest a RO.
This concept of IoT, Internet of Things, is something that you brought into the Drink Prime water purifier as well.
So the good thing about us is we were not from the industry. We took a fresh look at how things were done. This model would not have been possible for even 5 years back because of the costs associated and the technological complexity that was associated with Internet of Things. I would say we were in the right place at the right time in terms of technology, and we were curious enough just to identify a problem that we felt deeply about. So what this IoT typically does is it understands the quality and quantity of water that gets purified, and depending on that, we are able to get a lot more data on what is the macro level environmental conditions, what is the macro level detailed water analysis, also what is the micro level ppm that is associated. In addition to that, it also tells me if how many liters of water have you consumed. So what do we do with this data? Very interesting. Number one, we customize the water purification method that are just right to
Right.
give you safe drinking water. Number two, because of the fact that we understand how much of water you have consumed, let us say me and Andy, we stay in two different parts of Bangalore, hypothetically. Andy stays in a household where he stays alone. I stay in a household which shares the water purifier with 8 to 10 other individuals. Chances are my input water condition is very hard, which means I rely on borewell, or which has got a high salt intake, versus Andy's locality is getting water from the best possible municipal sources. If we buy a brand name water purifier, we would be using the exact same device. We would get service at the exact same intervals. Exactly the same filter cartridges would be changed. So what happens is typically it leaves a lot to be desired. So hence this one size fits all kind of a solution may not be the best possible way to either give me or Andy safe drinking water. What would happen is either one of us would be getting overcharged, wherein our consumption is not that much, while the second one would possibly be getting unsafe drinking water because of this one size fits all kind of a phenomenon. Yeah, I mean, tomorrow we can decide to ditch the entire model of this water purifiers altogether if we are able to find out a even simpler method where we can actually purify drinking water and provide drinking water to even a larger piece of population. Day after tomorrow, we can go into communal water purification methods also if we think that is the way that we are able to reach out to more households. So our model is very fluid. We don't have that baggage of decades of distribution and things behind us. We are pretty open to change, and we understand that we will have to change if we were to solve the drinking water problem of India.
Manas, I know we've been colleagues for quite a number of years. And how did you end up in Bangalore?
So I'm basically from Orissa, from a city called Rourkela. It's a tier 2 city, and I did my schooling there. And after that, I wanted to study technology, and that's when where I found out technology study in Bangalore is actually of a superior quality than what was available in Orissa. That sort of led me to come and take admission in a college in Bangalore, and that's where I did my bachelor's in electronics and communication. Post that, I worked for a year or so with Accenture, which is again another technology company. And after that, I did my MBA. I did my MBA from Pondicherry University. Went to Pondicherry for both academic and non-academic reasons.
as do lots of all the guys throughout India, especially South India. Yeah.
So yeah, did my master's specializing in marketing there, and then started my career as a management trainee in a company called Thomas Cook, which is into the travel domain. Worked there for about a year, then landed up in Sonata Software. Worked there for about 3 years. Then went ahead and started DrinkPrime. So that's been my journey in a nutshell. Yeah.
The term startup probably does not apply to you. You know, you've been in operation for close to a couple of years now. You've got a huge team behind you as well.
I mean, I would say that we have got the backing of some of the most trustworthy people in the entire ecosystem. We have got backers like the founders of some of the biggest startups in India, starting from the founders of Snapdeal to the founders of ShareChat and many other folks like them. In addition to that, we have got the most reputed names in venture capital backing us. So all I could say is this is a recognition of the mission that we are on. And if you start off with a mission of solving the problem of drinking water in India, which is possibly the biggest problem that India is facing today, as you go through the journey, people would get associated with that problem. People would sort of associate with you. So associate with your why. I mean, that why is very powerful for any entrepreneur. And with us also, even if you talk about the team, right, most of the team members and most of our early investors also were actually our customers to begin with. So because of the fact that they like the product, they like the idea, they like the mission of this company, all of them sort of got together, and extremely lucky that they have trusted us to be able to solve this problem, and extremely lucky to have been given to have this opportunity to actually make a difference in the lives of possibly millions of people around India.
Now, this next question will probably bring a smile on your face as well. Talking about customers, you need that one person to actually take a bet on your product and try it out. Who was your first customer?
So yeah, the first customer is actually a very close friend of ours, where he used to sit in the same way. I'm extremely thankful for Nitish, because this is also the time when the product was not well refined. We were trying to figure out a lot of things. That was also the time that he actually trusted us, which is two techies who used to sit in his next bay and work with him with his drinking water. So that was a big leap of faith from him. He is a happy customer of DrinkPrime till date, and eternally thankful for not only him, but the thousands of people who have placed their trust in us.
Another very important part of the podcast is to understand and discover books, music, and movies that you've been reading, listening, watching.
Quite honestly, I mean, my choice in movies has been a little bit, I mean, I've been a little slow to catch up on movies. But yeah, I'm definitely the person to give some awesome book recommendations, especially for people who are interested in entrepreneurship. So one book that I would like people to sort of who are interested in entrepreneurship to go through is to read is the story of Nike. The book is called Shoe Dog. Find a lot of parallels and a lot of inspiration to that guy. So like us who are little mad about water, Dr. Phil Knight was also a little mad about running and shoes in general. So you have to be a little mad, little crazy, little obsessed with the domain that you are in to be able to actually sustain through periods of hardship. Another book, when we talk about hardship, is a book actually by the name of The Hard Things About Hard Things. It is actually by Ben Horowitz. Ben Horowitz is the founder of a venture capital firm called Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the leading venture capital firms in the world. Now, when he talks about the realities of company building, when he talks about the realities of a startup life, you would understand that it's not all rosy. It's actually a lot of hard work. It's actually a lot of pressure that entrepreneurs go through, but at the same point in time, they have to maintain a positive outlook. They have to maintain a neutral this thing, because of the fact that they are the flag bearers of their company. So yeah, if I were to recommend books, I would say these two books come on top of us. And also, anyone who is interested in entrepreneurship, we have got awesome biographies for everyone, starting from Jack Ma to Elon Musk to Jeff Bezos, and Indian entrepreneurs like Ronnie Screwvala and multiple. So go through those biographies. You would learn a lot from them, and that would be a good place for anyone to start reading about, whoever is interested in entrepreneurship in general. Like I said, right, entrepreneurship is not a job, or it's actually a privilege to be able to lead a group of people who are far more talented than us. It's actually a privilege in every aspect that I do. So I actually enjoy what I do so much that I don't think that I would need a distraction by reading a novel or watching a movie. To me, a distraction from running my company may be actually reading about how other people ran bigger, more successful companies than what I am running.
You heard Manas Ranjan Hota, the co-founder of DrinkPrime, who's after a much bigger and altruistic goal, provide safe drinking water. Thanks, Manas. Thank you very much for your insights. And ladies and gentlemen, Manas Ranjan Hota is one of my connections, and perhaps yours too, in the 6 degrees of connection.